Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're doing, well, a real deep dive into something crucial. It affects communities, finances, really the basic need for an affordable place to live. We're talking about construction costs for new affordable multifamily housing. Specifically, we're looking at Virginia for 2025.
Yeah, and our main source here is this pretty comprehensive report, Presentation 2025.pdf. It's packed with key trends, lots of insights. And our mission, really, is to pull out the most important nuggets of knowledge from it. Figure out what's driving these costs. Why does this matter? Well, it matters for anyone involved in affordable housing developers, policymakers, advocates, or maybe just curious citizens like you trying to understand it all. Let's unpack this. So this report, it's not just data points, right? It's meant to be a tool for decision making. Its main goal is giving insights to stakeholders. But what makes this data so powerful?
Well, what's fascinating here, I think, is how directly these numbers hit home, how they impact people's actual ability to find housing. This isn't theoretical stuff. This data helps developers budget smarter, it helps build stronger funding proposals, and ultimately it means more efficient project planning. When you have this kind of detailed insight, it means more people might actually find an affordable home, maybe faster.
Okay, so let's start with some of those early signs in the report. The very first step, applications for new projects. For 2025, we're seeing 34 applications, which is a little bit fewer than 36 in 2024 and 37 the year before that in 2023. It's a small change, but what does the report say might be going on there? Market jitters or something else?
Yeah, the report does flag that dip. It might seem small, but it calls it sort of a potential canary in the coal mine. It could signal early shifts, not just in overall market confidence, but maybe specific funding streams tightening up, state or federal, or even rising interest rates, just making it tougher for developers to make the numbers work on these projects. And if you connect that to the bigger picture, those 34 projects, that's 1,974 new units planned for 2025. That's actually down nearly 6% from the 2,099 units in 2024. Fewer units each year, well, that can definitely squeeze the supply, right? Making it harder to keep up with demand there in Virginia. And it's important, too, the report stresses that these projects are spread across the state. So it gives a pretty comprehensive picture of costs, not just one area.
Right, the nearly 6% drop in units is definitely something to watch. And those potential reasons you mentioned are key. But then we get to the costs themselves. And wow, this is where the report really gets interesting. The overall financial impact, these escalating cost numbers, honestly, they're pretty stark. What was your first take when you saw that median construction cost per project jump? Over 18%.
Yeah, the sheer size of that increase jumps out. The median cost per project hitting $23,453,029 in 2025. Like you said, an 18.56% increase from just under $20 million in 2024. That's not just a sharp rise. The report really emphasizes this could create significant financing hurdles. Especially, for the nonprofit and mission-driven developers, they often work with tighter margins, rely more on fixed funding.
Okay, so it's not just a general cost hike. It really hits the viability of these specific kinds of projects. The report also points out the median project size, the total usable heated area grew a bit, about 4.11% larger, reaching 69,113 square feet. Now, you might think, okay, bigger buildings, maybe some economies of scale kick in.
That's the usual thinking, yeah. And larger projects can sometimes offer efficiencies. But what's critical here, and the report makes this really clear, is that the rising costs are just blowing past any potential savings from building bigger. So basically, developers are building slightly bigger spaces, but paying a lot more for every square foot within them.
And that cost per square foot figure up nearly 10%. What's driving that specifically? Is it materials, labor, both?
Yeah, that jumped to $379.46 per square foot in 2025. It's definitely outpacing typical inflation. The report points to a couple of things. Persistent labor shortages, skilled trades, particularly in Virginia, and that's combined with, continued volatility in material costs. We've seen it with lumber, concrete, you name it. It just makes every single square foot more expensive to build. And that translates directly, fewer affordable units built for the same amount of money. We also saw, interestingly, a slight dip in the median number of units per building, down to 52.5 units in 2025. It's not a huge drop, but it could reflect maybe some design changes or shifts towards slightly smaller developments, perhaps developers trying to manage those soaring costs by trimming unit counts, even if the overall building size grows a bit.
Okay, so fewer units per project potentially and way higher cost per square foot. So the cost per individual unit, that must be taking a big hit too.
Oh, absolutely. Maybe the most telling number in all this is that median cost per unit. It jumped more than 13%, hitting $450,952 in 2025. And this number is just so important because it directly impacts, first, the financing needed to even get the project off the ground. And second, crucially, the long-term affordability for the people who will live there. If that per unit cost keeps climbing, fewer people can afford it. Simple as that. And one last point on size. The typical residential unit size also grew slightly, about 3.3% to nearly 1,200 square feet, which, often reflects trying to better accommodate families, which is good. But like we've seen, larger units can also push up those per unit costs if you're not really careful managing everything else.
Okay, so $450,952 per unit. It's a staggering baseline. So if the total cost is climbing that fast, the next question is, well, where's money actually going? We need to kind of break down the pieces of that cost puzzle, right?
Exactly. And the report does a good job of that. It breaks the total project cost into three main buckets: contractors' costs, owners' costs, and developers' costs. Understanding this breakdown is really key because it shows where the increases are hitting hardest and maybe where you might theoretically find some savings. Contractors' costs are split further. You've got direct costs, that's the actual structure of the site work, and then indirect costs, things like general conditions, overhead and profit for the contractor, permits, fees, bonds, insurance, contingency funds, all that. Just looking at the contractor's new construction cost per unit, the median is $237,000. But when you add in all the contractor costs, direct and indirect, that median jumps to around $336,000 per unit. So yeah, this category alone is the biggest slice of the total cost, a major pressure point.
Okay, $336,000 just for the contractor's part per unit. That's huge. Does the report give any color on whether it's the direct building part or those indirects, permits, insurance, et cetera, that are really ballooning? Is there like a specific fee or permit type that's causing major headaches?
That's a good question. The report suggests that while direct costs are obviously significant, those indirect costs seem to be growing disproportionately fast. Things like permits and fees, general conditions, insurance, they're escalating. Why? Well, increasing regulatory complexity, for one, and just the higher cost of doing business generally in a volatile market. Actually, one developer quote in the report mentioned that just navigating the different permit requirements and timelines often adds unexpected costs and significant delays. Okay, moving on from the contractor. Next up are the owner's costs. This excludes land costs, by the way. These average about $67,000 per unit. This bucket includes things like engineering, architectural fees, financing fees, which can be substantial legal costs, various types of insurance needed during development. And these expenses, they often tend to rise with project complexity. Bigger, more intricate projects usually mean more specialized oversight, higher insurance premiums, that sort of thing. Then the third piece is the developer's fees. These average just over $36,000 per unit. And this fee compensates the developer for managing the whole complex process. Everything from initial concept and design coordination to securing financing, managing all the risks involved, and sometimes marketing the units too. So you put it all together, the contractor costs, the owner costs, the developer fee, plus land costs, which vary a lot but are always a factor. The median total cost per unit comes out to about $446,000. That's really the comprehensive number. The foundation cost that ultimately determines if a project is feasible and, down the line, affordable.
Right, $446,000. That's the all-in development cost per unit. But like you said, that's not the final price tag someone sees, is it?
Yeah.
So how does that $446K translate into what a unit might actually sell for on the market? What else gets layered on top?
Exactly right. That $446,000 is the base, but several other cost components get added to reach that final sales price. First, you've got marketing and sales costs. Think real estate commissions, advertising, maybe staging the model units. That's typically estimated around 3%, so about $13,380 per unit, based on our median cost. Then there are carrying costs. What if units don't sell immediately? You still have property taxes, insurance, utilities. That's often budgeted at about 1.5%, so roughly $6,690 per unit. You also have seller closing costs. Sometimes developers cover part of the buyer's closing costs or pay transfer taxes, legal fees associated with the sale, maybe 1%, so around $4,460 per unit. And developers usually set aside a small reserve for warranties or potential defects found early on, say 0.5%, which is about $2,230 per unit.
Okay, so those add up. And then comes the developer's profit margin. The report uses a 15% margin in its example, which adds another, $66,900 per unit. Now, the report notes 15% is often seen as reasonable given development risks, but specifically for affordable housing, where every dollar matters for accessibility. Is there any talk in the report about ways to maybe incentivize lower margins, like different tax credits or partnerships to make it work financially while keeping prices down?
That's a really critical point. The report acknowledges that 15% is pretty standard for market rate projects, and it kind of implies that's often what's needed to get developers interested in taking on the complexities and risks of affordable housing. It doesn't explicitly lay out specific ways to incentivize lower margins, no. But it sort of implicitly suggests that if you wanted developers to accept lower margins, you'd need other financial supports like bigger tax credits or direct subsidies to make up the difference and keep the projects viable. It really is a delicate balance, you know. Developers need a reasonable return to build, but residents desperately need prices they can actually afford.
So when you stack all those extra costs on top of the $446,000 basity, the marketing, carrying, closing, warranty, and that 15% profit, the final number is pretty eye-opening. The final estimated sales price per unit, based on these figures, climbs to roughly $540,000. Wow, that's like 21% higher than the actual cost to build it.
It really highlights the cumulative effect, doesn't it? And it helps explain why even what might seem like modest cost increases during construction can really snowball. They can end up pushing those final sale prices significantly higher, potentially putting them out of reach for the very people the housing is intended for. It's a complex equation, definitely. Lots of moving parts adding up.
So just to recap this deep dive then, we're seeing costs that are either holding steady at high levels or, more often, rising across basically every category for building affordable housing in Virginia. The increases in contractor costs and the total cost per unit are particularly sharp. The numbers are, well, undeniably challenging.
Absolutely. And looking at the longer trend, the report confirms costs just keep climbing. While having this kind of detailed report is a positive step, transparency is good. The underlying reality is that prices remain very high. Careful, maybe even innovative budgeting is going to be absolutely critical for developers and policymakers moving forward. These patterns really do point to mounting financial pressures in the affordable housing sector. Makes every new unit built a really significant financial undertaking.
So thinking about all this, these significant escalating costs at every single stage of affordable housing development in Virginia, it really makes you wonder, doesn't it, what new and innovative approaches, maybe in construction itself or financing models, different policy incentives, was going to be absolutely essential for Virginia to actually expand its affordable housing stock and, crucially, keep it truly accessible for residents in the years ahead. Lots to think about there. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.